Have you ever noticed that the best results often come when we finally stop worrying so much? That opportunities seem to appear the moment we stop chasing them desperately? Or that the peace we long for only shows up when we stop trying to control it? This paradox follows us throughout life. We grow up believing we have to fight, plan, and stress endlessly to get what we want. But what if it's the other way around? What if this obsession with control is actually what keeps us from living fully? Michel de Montaigne, a brilliant and somewhat rebellious thinker from the 16th century, had a fascinating answer to this. He lived in turbulent times. He lost friends and family, battled illness, and watched his world turn upside down. Yet, it was only when he stopped trying to control everything that he discovered a kind of freedom that very few ever experience. Montaigne wasn't a preacher of absolute truths. Quite the opposite. His philosophy was an invitation to doubt, to experiment, and above all, to detach. He showed that by letting go of our need for certainty and control, we open the door to something far more powerful: tranquility and authenticity. In this story, we'll explore how Montaigne's philosophy can help us live without the constant weight of worry. We'll uncover why letting go might just be the secret to a lighter, more meaningful life. After all, as Montaigne himself used to ask, "What do I know?" Michel de Montaigne was born in 1533 in a France torn apart by religious wars, political intrigue, and constant instability. From a young age, his life was shaped by two opposing forces: privilege and tragedy. As the son of a wealthy family, he received an exceptional education. He mastered Latin as a child and was exposed to the greatest ideas of his era. But no privilege could shield him from life's harsh realities: loss, pain, and uncertainty. By the time Montaigne reached his 30s, life had tested him brutally. His best friend, Etienne de la Boétie, died suddenly, leaving him devastated. Soon after, his father passed away. Then, in a bizarre accident, his brother was killed by being struck in the head with a tennis ball. As if that weren't enough, Montaigne himself nearly died after falling from a galloping horse. And to seal this chapter of suffering, his newborn daughter died shortly after birth. Imagine enduring all of that in such a short span of time. Imagine feeling the world collapse around you, realizing that the fragility of existence can no longer be ignored. Montaigne could have gone mad. He could have drowned in despair, but instead, he made a radical decision. He abandoned public life and withdrew to his family estate in the countryside. There, in the quiet of his private library, surrounded by more than 1,000 books, he discovered something few ever find: a space for inner freedom. He realized that nothing in the outside world could ever guarantee stability or absolute safety. The only thing he could truly control was himself, his own perspective and the way he chose to respond to life. It was in that silence and solitude that he began writing his famous essays. These weren't manuals of universal truths. They were explorations of his own doubts, mistakes, and contradictions. For Montaigne, self-knowledge wasn't about perfection. It was about accepting uncertainty, again and again. Montaigne discovered that much of human suffering comes from our illusion of control. We convince ourselves that we can predict the future, avoid pain, and shape the world to our will. But the truth is, we control almost nothing. For him, the secret of peace wasn't about mastering life. It was about learning to live with its unpredictability. His retreat from public life wasn't an act of surrender, but of liberation. He wasn't running away. He was finally learning how to live on his own terms. Away from politics, social obligations, and the constant expectations of others, Montaigne carved out a space where he could simply be. And maybe that's one of the greatest lessons his life offers us. Sometimes, we need to step back from the noise of the world to finally hear our own voice. When we stop worrying so much about pleasing others, when we loosen our grip on external approval, we discover a kind of freedom no one can take away. And what if, just what if, everything we cling to as certain is really nothing more than a comforting illusion? What if our endless search for guarantees is actually the root of our anxiety? Montaigne wasn't searching for absolute truths, and maybe that's exactly why he remains one of the freest philosophers who ever lived. His most famous question, "What do I know?" wasn't just intellectual humility. It was an invitation to live differently. For him, tranquility didn't mean having all the answers. It meant learning to live side by side with uncertainty. Since ancient times, philosophers have debated the best path to a good life. The Stoics emphasized self-control and accepting fate. The Epicureans believed that simplicity and pleasure were the keys to happiness. Montaigne, however, chose a different path. He distrusted any philosophy that claimed to offer final, absolute answers. Instead, he drew inspiration from skepticism, a school of thought that questioned whether humans could ever grasp ultimate truth. For him, there was no single correct way to live, no one explanation that captured all of life. The world was uncertain, fluid, full of contradictions, and the true wise person wasn't the one who tried to simplify life into rigid formulas, but the one who learned to navigate uncertainty without panic. This perspective contrasts sharply with how we live today. We're obsessed with certainty. We demand foolproof answers for every problem, search for guaranteed steps to success, and crave advice that promises recognition and happiness. But Montaigne saw that this obsession with control only makes us more anxious. His proposal was radically simple. Accept that we don't know everything, and that it's perfectly fine not to know. He believed the human mind is limited, fragile, and often misled by arrogance. In fact, he enjoyed poking fun at the great intellectuals of his time, pointing out that even the most brilliant minds were still vulnerable to illusions and mistakes. Our judgment is so fragile, he wrote, that most of the time it gets lost in the dark. What one person calls truth, another sees as error. This idea may feel uncomfortable, but it's also liberating. If everything is uncertain, then we're free from the crushing weight of having to be right all the time. If our beliefs and opinions might be wrong, then we can move through life more lightly, more open to dialogue, more flexible, more human. Montaigne saw that embracing uncertainty made people less rigid, less dogmatic, and above all, more tolerant. Living through an age of brutal religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, he realized that so much of human suffering came from our refusal to admit that we might be wrong. By letting go of the illusion of certainty, Montaigne found something rare, genuine peace of mind. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. He didn't have to defend his worldview as the one correct answer, nor cling to fixed beliefs that could easily turn into cages. Instead, he observed, experimented, and learned without the pressure of reaching a final conclusion. In the end, Montaigne teaches us that peace doesn't come from certainty, but from lightness in the face of uncertainty. When we stop obsessing over being right, we can finally breathe. Think about it. What would happen if you stopped caring so much about what others think? If you no longer measured your worth by success or failure, if you accepted that life is unpredictable and the real secret isn't controlling it, but adapting to it. For Montaigne, life wasn't a puzzle to be solved, it was an experience to be lived, and he learned that lesson the hard way, through sudden deaths of loved ones, illness, and a near-fatal accident. Those experiences showed him that existence is fragile, and clinging too tightly to the future is a trap. So he changed his entire approach to life. He left politics behind, retreated to the countryside, and chose to live in the present, writing, reflecting, and exploring the human condition without the burden of chasing grand ambitions. But don't mistake this for passivity or indifference. Montaigne wasn't a fatalist who blindly accepted everything, nor a nihilist who thought nothing mattered. What he proposed was something far subtler and far more powerful: active detachment. He believed we should act, strive, and pursue what we want, but without becoming slaves to the outcome. In other words, do everything in your power, but don't despair if things don't turn out as expected. He once wrote, "No wind is favorable to the sailor who doesn't know where he's going." That's the key. Have direction, but don't obsess over the destination. Those who learn to live with life's unpredictability, Montaigne believed, become lighter, wiser, and ultimately happier. The harder we try to control everything, the more we suffer when life inevitably slips beyond our grasp. If you look back at your own experiences, you might notice that your happiest, freest moments often came when you finally let go of excessive worry. Maybe it was when you stopped caring so much about other people's opinions, or when you gave up forcing a situation, or perhaps when you simply accepted life as it was. Montaigne reminds us that life happens in the now. Too much attachment to the future blinds us to the beauty of the present. He wrote, "The one who fixes their happiness on the future condemns themselves to eternal unhappiness." Does this mean we should give up our dreams and ambitions? Not at all. It means learning to let go, to flow with life instead of fighting against it. And paradoxically, when we do this, things start to happen more naturally. Results come, not because we're obsessed with them, but because we've stopped pressuring ourselves. Montaigne shows us that true freedom isn't about conquering the world. It's about conquering ourselves. And to do that, we must learn to live lightly, with curiosity, and with the willingness to accept whatever life brings. At the end of the day, Montaigne's lesson is deceptively simple. Stop trying to control everything, and start learning how to live. But of course, like all simple truths, this one carries deep complexity. How do we actually detach from the need for certainty, success, and control? Montaigne didn't offer a magic formula. He didn't claim there was one path for everyone. Instead, he invited us to experiment, to observe ourselves, to accept our contradictions. To him, life wasn't a straight line. It was a series of unexpected curves, and wisdom meant learning to navigate them without losing ourselves in despair. Montaigne teaches us that our obsession with certainty only fuels our anxiety. Our craving for recognition traps us, and our urge to control everything pulls us further away from what really matters. Paradoxically, when we stop worrying so much, results start to appear. Why? Because the moment we free ourselves from the need for approval, we begin acting more authentically. When we release our obsession with success, we become more creative and spontaneous. And when we finally accept that life is uncertain, we discover peace. Montaigne lived and died true to this philosophy. In his final years, he devoted himself to writing, exploring ideas, and observing life exactly as it was, without illusions, without pretenses, without masks. He came to understand that humanity's greatest mistake is taking itself too seriously, and that the secret to a meaningful life isn't chasing ultimate answers, but learning to ask the right questions. So let me ask you, what if, from this moment on, you stopped carrying the weight of constant worry? What if you no longer felt the need to prove something to others? What if you simply embraced uncertainty and started living fully in the present? Like Montaigne, you might discover that true freedom isn't about controlling the world. It's about freeing yourself from yourself. If this reflection resonates with you, take it as an invitation. In an age where we're bombarded with information, demands, and expectations, pausing to imagine a lighter, freer path is already a revolutionary act. Montaigne reminds us that we don't need all the answers. Life doesn't have to be an endless struggle to prove ourselves. We can simply live, and that, in itself, is powerful.